So we are now officially at the end of week 4 of the Big 3 Challenge, where I look to outlift my 20-year-old self in the squat, bench and deadlift. So the plan with this series was to give you progress updates as frequently as possible. However, I wanted to allow for enough time in between my sessions to actually build on some progress. And now as we're coming towards the back end of February, I do feel like I'm starting to build momentum. So what I'm going to do now is we'll go into each individual lift, break down the numbers and see how things are currently looking. So obviously in week 1, I used that as my baseline week to identify where my numbers were at with the squat, bench and deadlift. And then I can use those markers to reflect back on to see how long it's going to take me to achieve the longer term goal of hitting a 220 deadlift, a 180 kilo back squat and a 140 kilo bench press. So after the baseline week, I've now been consistently progressing these 3 workouts per week for the last 3 weeks. So we're going to kickstart with the squat numbers, where I started off at 120 kilos and achieving 5 repetitions. And this was completed in my 3x5 workout. In my most recent squat session, I've managed to build up to 130 kilos, again completing 3x5. This for me is definitely going to be my most challenging lift, and it's probably going to be the last one that I complete out of all of the 3 big lifts. I don't know what it is about the squat, but it's not necessarily something I particularly enjoy. I definitely find it hard based off being a very tall and lanky individual, so my limbs and my mechanics just don't feel like they're suited to this lift, but ultimately I just don't enjoy it as much when compared to the deadlift and the bench press. However, regardless, I still feel like I'm moving in the right direction. I'm refining my technique each week, and that's kind of what the purpose of workout 3 is for, where I've now started to adjust the programming to put in pauses to get me stronger in that bottom position, which is typically where my weak link is. So that's currently a 10 kilo progression overall. And now we move on to the bench press. Again, an exercise that I typically enjoy despite having my back and forth with it over the years. So I started this lift off with 5 repetitions at 105 kilos. And I managed to achieve this, I think, for 1 set within my initial workout. I then built it up to 3x5 at 105. And now I've managed to progress this lift to 110 kilos, achieving 2 working sets, full 5 reps at 110 kilos. So for me, this is pretty solid progress. And although across a 3-week period of time, 5 kilos doesn't seem like much, but when you get to the stage of training that I am, where I've been training now in excess of 15 plus years, progress doesn't come around as quickly. So whether you're making a 1.25 kilo gain or a 5 kilo gain, any kind of progress is progress at the end of the day. Now I believe that the bench press will be the second lift that I achieve within the Big 3 Challenge, just because predictions at the moment have me sat around about 125 kilos for a 1 rep max, which only puts me out around 15 kilos from hitting that end goal. So third and finally, we have the deadlift. One of my personal favorites and something that I've been doing now for a long period of time. Be that the conventional deadlift, trap bar deadlift, sumo deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, any kind of deadlift variation I typically enjoy. Now my baseline numbers for the conventional deadlift were much higher than that of the bench press and the squat. In my first session, I was around 170 kgs for 5 repetitions. And in my most recent session, I completed 3 sets of 190 kilos at 3 repetitions. So again, this one still needs work building up to that volume of 5 repetitions, but I know that I have 190 kilos comfortably in the bag. And the conventional deadlift is the exercise that I expect to complete the first, based around my predicted values now being around 210 kgs for a 1 rep max, which in theory then only puts me 10 kilos away from hitting the longer term goal of 220 kilos. So there's been numerous challenges even within this short period of time, from lack of motivation and desire to actually want to go to the gym, to having some rough nights of sleep, additional stresses from home, and even some shitty days when it comes to nutrition. So by no means has this been optimal, yet we've still managed to squeeze out some relatively consistent progress. After week 2, we made some subtle adjustments where I reduced down total volume in that 3rd workout to allow my body to recover. Because even after the 2nd week, I was feeling pretty battered and beat up. And by the time it came around to that 3rd session of the week, I really didn't feel like I had much in the tank. So even just a subtle reduction going from 5 sets of 3 to 3 sets of 3 has now allowed me to properly recover and make the most of all 3 workouts. And to be honest with you, my biggest wins are simply just being consistent. I'm not exceptionally happy with any of the lifts right now. However, I do feel like they're all moving in the right direction despite the discrepancies between all 3 of them. But I'm just happy that I've been consistently showing up for those 3 sessions across this last month. Now, I've already mentioned the subtle changes that I made in workout 3, which was to simply reduce down total volume to allow me to recover. And likewise, I was feeling it leading into the back end of the week when I would complete this Friday workout. Now, in terms of my accessory exercises that I'm doing, again, I've been relatively consistent with those additional 3 exercises, which gets paired alongside the 2 main lifts in each of the workouts. However, I train in a commercial gym, and as you know, these gyms get crazy busy and you're not always going to have access to the equipment that you want. So I definitely have had to make my fair share of adjustments along the way to accommodate for a busy and overpopulated gym. But the great thing about these 3 big lifts is that they're transferable to pretty much any gym around the world. Pretty much every gym around the world will have an Olympic barbell, a squat rack, and a bench, which means you should be able to then complete the squat, bench, and deadlift. So moving forward into March, I don't intend on making any changes to the programming. However, I will be attempting to place a slightly bigger emphasis on my supplementation. And by that, I simply mean the creatine. So I've been doing a great job of making sure I'm hitting adequate protein on a day-to-day basis. However, I definitely have let the habit of creatine slip, and I've probably only taken it once or twice across the last 4 weeks. I know for sure that this would definitely help me to aid my recovery and increase my performance. I've just got to make it more of a habit in doing so. So I'm going to play around with some simple approaches to stack that habit on top of another one, or simply maybe even add it into my daily protein shake to make it a more consistent variable moving forward to help enhance my progress. So now some predicted targets for the end of March that I would like to achieve. So I would definitely want to be at 140 kilos for the back squat. I want to be achieving at least 115 kilos on the bench press. And I would like to be up at that 200 kilo marker for the deadlift. So those are my predictions, somewhere within the 3 to 5 rep range for all 3 lifts by the back end of March in the next 30 days. And if you want to see updates on a more regular basis, head over to my Instagram page at TA Fitness Online.